Welcome to Speaking History. Today, we dive into some of the darkest and most baffling mysteries that have haunted the FBI for decades. These cases have left investigators scratching their heads and the public gripped with terror. From elusive killers to mysterious disappearances, these are stories that defy explanation, leaving behind only questions and eerie traces of unsolved crime. In this first part of our series, we'll explore 5 of the most chilling FBI unsolved cases, each one more mysterious than the last. Brace yourself for a journey into the unknown, where answers are few, but the suspense is endless. Case number 1. The Alphabet Murders, 1971 to 1973. Our first unsolved case takes us back to Rochester, New York, where the haunting story of the Alphabet Murders unfolded. Between 1971 and 1973, the peaceful community was shaken to its core by a series of brutal murders that to this day remain shrouded in mystery. The killer, who seemed to choose his victims with chilling precision, preyed on young girls with matching initials. Each girl's first and last name began with the same letter. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was a pattern. 3 girls, Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowicz, and Michelle Maenza, became the tragic symbols of this horrifying spree. Carmen Colon, just 10 years old, was the first victim. On a seemingly ordinary day, she disappeared on her way home from the pharmacy. Hours later, her body was discovered outside the city, dumped near a desolate road. But the horror didn't stop there. Barely 6 months later, 11-year-old Wanda Walkowicz met a similar fate. She vanished after running an errand, her lifeless body found along another rural road. The final victim, Michelle Maenza, was only 11 years old. She, too, disappeared on a typical day, only for her body to be discovered in the same eerie fashion. What makes this case all the more chilling is the killer's calculated behavior. Each girl had matching initials, CC, WW, MM, and their bodies were found in towns with the same starting letters. It was as if the killer was playing a sinister game, taunting both the police and the public. The pattern was so deliberate that it left the community paralyzed with fear, wondering who would be next. Despite an intense investigation, which included interviewing hundreds of suspects and even calling in FBI profilers, the case hit dead ends at every turn. Rumors circulated about potential suspects, including a serial killer named Kenneth Bianchi, one of the infamous Hillside Stranglers. Bianchi had connections to Rochester, and for a moment it seemed like the puzzle might finally be solved. But DNA evidence eventually ruled him out, leaving the case as cold as ever. The Alphabet Murders remain an enigma to this day. Decades later, the question still lingers. Was the killer someone hiding in plain sight, blending into the fabric of everyday life? Or did they simply vanish into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of grief and unanswered questions? As we close the chapter on this first case, remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that are never caught. The Alphabet Murders stand as a terrifying reminder that even the most meticulous investigations can fall short when faced with the unpredictable nature of evil. Case number: the Gardner Museum Heist, 1990. On the cold early morning of March 18, 1990, Boston's Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum became the site of one of the most audacious and baffling art heists in history, a mystery so deep it still haunts the FBI and art lovers to this day. In just 81 minutes, 2 thieves managed to pull off what seemed like an impossible crime, walking away with art valued at over $500 million. A collection that has never been recovered. But this was no ordinary robbery. It was a meticulous, daring, and suspenseful crime that continues to leave investigators scratching their heads. It all started just after midnight, when 2 men, disguised as police officers, approached the museum. They rang the buzzer and claimed they were responding to a disturbance call. The night shift security guard, thinking nothing of it, let them in. What happened next was the beginning of a nightmare. The officers swiftly handcuffed the two guards on duty, taping them up and locking them in the museum's basement. With the guards out of the way, the thieves had full control of the building. The thieves moved with chilling precision, as if they knew exactly what they were after. For nearly an hour and a half, they roamed the museum's galleries, carefully selecting 13 pieces of priceless art. Among the stolen masterpieces were Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, his only known seascape, Vermeer's The Concert, one of fewer than 40 known paintings by the artist, and a series of sketches by Degas. The thieves cut many of the paintings directly from their frames, leaving behind empty borders that still hang in the museum today, as if waiting for their missing treasures to return. But it wasn't just the art that made this heist so chilling. It was the silence that followed. The thieves seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind no clear fingerprints, no security footage, no trace of where they'd gone. The art world was left stunned. How had they managed to pull off such a brazen robbery with so few clues? Theories began swirling like a whirlwind. Some believed the heist was the work of professional criminals, possibly tied to organized crime, looking to use the paintings as leverage in future deals. Others speculated it was an inside job, as the thieves appeared to know the museum's layout far too well. The guards on duty that night also raised suspicion, particularly one who had opened the door. He had an odd history, including once applying for a job at the police department that the thieves were pretending to be from. However, despite years of questioning, no solid evidence against him, or anyone, has ever surfaced. In the years following the heist, the FBI launched one of its largest investigations ever, chasing leads around the world. But each promising clue seemed to dissolve into nothing. Rumors circulated that the stolen artwork had been hidden in secret vaults in Europe, or that it had been destroyed to cover the tracks of those involved. In 2013, the FBI announced they had identified the culprits, members of a criminal organization based in New England and the Mid-Atlantic, but, frustratingly, the names were never made public, and the stolen art remained lost. As of today, over 30 years later, the Gardner Museum still offers a $10 million reward for any information leading to the recovery of the stolen pieces. The frames, eerily empty, continue to hang on the museum walls as a haunting reminder of that fateful night. The Gardner Museum heist isn't just a theft, it's a riddle wrapped in an enigma. How could such a massive crime be carried out so perfectly? Where are those masterpieces now, and will they ever return to their rightful place? The answers remain elusive, buried in the shadows of a mystery that grows darker with every passing year. And as the FBI continues to search for even the faintest of clues, one question remains: will the greatest art heist in history ever be solved? Case number 3. The Zodiac Killer, 1960s to 1970s. In the late 1960s, a shadowy figure began to terrorize Northern California, leaving behind a trail of cryptic messages, chilling phone calls, and a body count that would forever etch him into the annals of true crime history. This figure became known as the Zodiac Killer, a name synonymous with fear, mystery, and the ultimate game of cat and mouse. Despite decades of investigation, the identity of this elusive predator remains one of the FBI's most confounding unsolved cases. The Zodiac's reign of terror began on December 20th, 1968, when high school sweethearts Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday were brutally shot while parked on a remote road in Vallejo, California. Their deaths, at first, appeared to be an isolated incident, but it soon became apparent that something far darker was at play. Just 7 months later, on July 4th, 1969, another couple, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, were ambushed in their car. This time, the killer made sure to leave his mark. Shortly after the attack, a man phoned the police, calmly confessing to the murders and revealing crucial details only the killer could have known. And then, with spine-chilling calmness, he said, "I also killed those kids last year." The police were now dealing with a serial killer, one who craved attention. But it wasn't just the murders that made the Zodiac Killer infamous. It was his taunting letters, sent to newspapers across the San Francisco Bay Area. In these cryptic messages, he boasted of his crimes, claiming to have killed as many as 37 people. Each letter was signed with a symbol that would soon become iconic, a circle with a cross through it, the mark of the Zodiac. Among his letters were puzzles, ciphers, that he dared the public and law enforcement to solve, claiming that they would reveal his true identity. The most famous of these, the Zodiac 340 cipher, took over 50 years to crack. In 2020, a team of cryptographers finally decoded it, but it revealed little more than the killer's twisted mind at work. "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber." The cipher, like so many other clues in this case, brought investigators no closer to unmasking the man behind the moniker. The Zodiac wasn't just a killer. He was a master manipulator. His letters dripped with arrogance, often taunting the police with their inability to catch him. One letter famously read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all." Over the next few years, more victims followed. On September 27, 1969, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were enjoying a peaceful day by Lake Berryessa when a masked man approached them, tied them up, and stabbed them brutally. In a twisted ritual, the killer drew his Zodiac symbol on Hartnell's car door before leaving the scene. Cecilia did not survive, but Brian lived to tell the tale, describing the killer's chillingly calm demeanor. The final confirmed murder occurred on October 11, 1969, when taxi driver Paul Stine was shot in the head in San Francisco. Unlike the earlier killings in rural or secluded areas, this one occurred in the middle of a bustling city. Despite the public nature of the crime, the Zodiac slipped away, leaving behind a bloody trail and no clear clues. As the Zodiac continued to terrorize the region, countless suspects emerged, but none fit the puzzle perfectly. One name that consistently surfaced was Arthur Lee Allen, a troubled man with a history of disturbing behavior. Investigators found several damning pieces of circumstantial evidence connecting him to the case, but they could never definitively prove his guilt. Allen died in 1992, and with him went the secrets of whether or not he was the Zodiac. Though the Zodiac's killing spree seemingly ended in the early 1970s, his legacy continued to grip the public. Over the years, numerous cold case detectives, amateur sleuths, and even the FBI have tirelessly tried to solve the case. Yet, despite countless hours of investigation, the Zodiac's true identity has remained a mystery. The Zodiac Killer left behind a dark legacy, one of fear, taunts, and unsolved puzzles. He became more than just a murderer. He became a myth, a ghostly figure that evaded capture, slipping through the cracks of time. And while the trail has grown cold, the case remains open, a reminder that sometimes evil can remain hidden in plain sight. As of today, the Zodiac Killer remains at large, one of history's most infamous and chilling unsolved cases. Was he ever caught for a different crime? Did he die in obscurity? Or perhaps most hauntingly, is he still out there, blending into society, quietly watching as his legend grows? The mystery endures, just as the Zodiac intended. Case number, the Servant Girl Annihilator, 1884 to 1885. In the heart of Austin, Texas, during the years 1884 to 1885, an unseen terror crept through the city's streets. An elusive and brutal killer, later dubbed the Servant Girl Annihilator, targeted the city's most vulnerable, young, poor servant girls. His reign of terror left a trail of bloodshed and confusion that, over a century later, remains one of America's earliest and most mysterious unsolved serial murder cases. The horror began on December 30th, 1884, when Molly Smith, a 25-year-old African-American servant, was brutally attacked while she slept in a small servant's quarters. Molly's body was found hacked and mutilated with an axe, her skull crushed from the blows. Her body was so savagely brutalized that it shocked the entire city, but no one could have predicted that this gruesome murder would be just the beginning of a year-long nightmare. In the months that followed, the killer struck again and again, each time with increasing brutality. He targeted 8 victims, most of them young, African-American women who worked as domestic servants. The attacks were so brutal, they seemed almost inhuman. The killer would strike at night, dragging his victims from their beds, often out into their backyards, where they would be mutilated in unimaginable ways. Some were dismembered, others scalped, and all were left to bleed out alone in the dark. But the mystery of the Servant Girl Annihilator didn't stop with the savagery of his murders. The killer seemed to slip through the shadows, vanishing without a trace after each attack. The city was gripped with panic. The attacks occurred under the cover of night, and despite patrols and heightened security, the killer struck with chilling precision, evading all attempts to catch him. Witnesses reported seeing a shadowy figure fleeing the scenes of the crimes, but descriptions were vague and contradictory. Some said the killer was a white man, others swore he was black. Some claimed he moved like a ghost, darting in and out of the night with supernatural speed. The only thing that was certain was that the killer was intelligent and calculating, knowing when and where to strike, and then disappearing before anyone could track him. The killings continued into 1885. On May 7th, 1885, Eliza Shelley, another young servant, was found in a similar fashion, her head crushed by a sharp object. The summer brought more terror. Irene Cross was attacked in her home, her face slashed open with a knife in a vicious and frenzied attack. The violence escalated to such a degree that Austin residents began barricading their homes at night, in fear that the Annihilator would come for them next. What made the case even more perplexing was the randomness with which the killer began to choose his victims. While his early attacks targeted only African-American servant women, his later victims included 2 white women, Eula Phillips and Susan Hancock, both murdered on Christmas Eve of 1885. The once-believed pattern of the killer targeting the city's vulnerable poor was shattered, throwing the city into even greater panic. These attacks took place in wealthier parts of the city, suggesting that the killer had the audacity to cross social boundaries, making everyone in Austin feel like a potential target. The brutal killing spree culminated in these final attacks, which were among the most shocking. Eula Phillips was only 17 years old, and the savagery of her murder, her body was found bludgeoned and nearly decapitated, sent shockwaves across the country. The murder of Susan Hancock on the same night, in a similarly gruesome manner, seemed to mock the authorities' inability to protect the city's residents. Authorities scrambled to catch the elusive killer. Several men were arrested, including Jimmy Phillips, Eula's husband, who was briefly convicted of her murder, but later acquitted. The police were desperate for leads, even consulting fortune tellers, offering rewards, and conducting sweeping arrests. Yet, despite the high-profile investigations, no solid evidence ever emerged to pinpoint the identity of the Annihilator. Rumors and theories swirled. Some believed the murders were racially motivated, others whispered about a deranged doctor or even a soldier with battle-induced insanity. As time passed, some began to suspect the unthinkable, that the killer had fled to England, and perhaps the Servant Girl Annihilator had transformed into the notorious Jack the Ripper, whose killing spree began in London just 3 years after the Austin murders ended. Despite countless investigations, books, and theories over the years, the identity of the Servant Girl Annihilator remains a complete mystery. How did he evade capture in a small city like Austin, Why did his attacks cease so suddenly? And could he have been responsible for other unsolved murders beyond Texas? The Servant Girl Annihilator case stands as one of America's earliest serial murder mysteries, and the lack of answers only adds to the eerie aura that surrounds it. His shadow still looms over Austin's history, a reminder that sometimes the most horrifying monsters are the ones that walk among us, hidden in plain sight. And so, the legend of the Servant Girl Annihilator endures, chilling those who dare to look back at the city's darkest hour, wondering if the killer was ever brought to justice, or if he continued his reign of terror under another name, in another place, far from the blood-soaked streets of Austin. Case number: The Case of the Missing Sodder Children, 1945. It was Christmas Eve, 1945, when the Sodder family's world was turned upside down by a fire that consumed their home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. But what should have been a tragic accident soon spiraled into one of the most confounding and disturbing mysteries in American history. 5 of the Sodder children vanished that night, their bodies never found, leaving behind a haunting question: what really happened to the Sodder children? The night began like any other Christmas Eve. George Sodder and his wife Jenny celebrated the holiday with their 10 children. As the evening drew late, the older children asked if they could stay up past their usual bedtime to play with new toys. George and Jenny agreed, and one by one, the family members made their way to bed, with 5 of the youngest children remaining downstairs. At around 1 a.m., Jenny was abruptly awakened by the smell of smoke. Panic set in as she and George raced to evacuate the house. They managed to save 4 of their children, but as the flames quickly consumed the wooden structure, the 5 youngest Sodder children, Morris, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, were nowhere to be seen. George frantically tried to reach them, but was thwarted by a series of inexplicable failures. The phone line was dead, the ladder he always kept against the house had mysteriously vanished, and even his trucks, which he planned to use to climb to the children's window, refused to start. The fire raged on, reducing the Sodder home to ash and rubble within hours. Authorities arrived the next morning to sift through the wreckage, expecting to find the remains of the missing children. But after an extensive search, they found nothing. Not a single bone or trace of the 5 kids. The fire chief suggested that the flames had burned hot enough to completely cremate the bodies, but something about this explanation didn't sit right with George and Jenny. They couldn't shake the feeling that something far more sinister had happened that night. In the days and weeks following the fire, strange details began to emerge, casting doubt on the official narrative. Jenny, desperate for answers, conducted her own research and discovered that house fires, even at extremely high temperatures, never fully incinerate bones. Moreover, household appliances and fragments of roofing had survived the blaze intact, raising the question: if these items endured the fire, how could the children's remains have vanished without a trace? Then came the phone call. At midnight, just an hour before the fire started, Jenny had answered the house phone to hear a strange voice asking for someone she didn't know. Laughter and clinking glasses echoed in the background before the caller abruptly hung up. It seemed like a harmless prank at the time, but in hindsight, it felt ominously connected. The Sodders also recalled unsettling incidents in the months leading up to the fire. A stranger had visited their home, trying to sell them life insurance. When George declined, the man angrily warned him, saying, "Your house is going to go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." Another visitor commented on their fuse box, predicting that it would cause a fire someday. George had recently had the wiring inspected and found it to be in perfect condition. As rumors swirled, George and Jenny became convinced that the fire was not an accident. They suspected their children had been kidnapped, and the fire was set as a cover-up. But who would do such a thing, and why? The Sodders had deep ties to Italy, and George, a proud and vocal critic of Mussolini, had long believed that his political views might have made him enemies within the Italian immigrant community. Some speculated that the mafia, or a political group, may have orchestrated the kidnapping in retaliation for George's outspoken opposition to fascism. But these were just theories, wild, terrifying guesses in the absence of concrete answers. As the years passed, the Sodder family continued to pursue the mystery. They erected a billboard along a highway near their home, offering a $5,000 reward, later increased to $10,000, for information leading to the recovery of their children. But while they received numerous leads, none ever led to a resolution. In 1967, more than 2 decades after the fire, Jenny received an eerie envelope in the mail. Inside was a photograph of a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Louis Sodder. On the back was a cryptic note. Louis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Elil Boys. A 90132 or 35 inches. The letter, postmarked from Kentucky, was the closest the Sodders had come to any tangible evidence that their children might still be alive. They hired a private investigator to follow the lead, but he disappeared without a trace, just like their children. Despite exhaustive efforts, George and Jenny Sodder never found out what happened to their 5 missing children. George passed away in 1969, and Jenny followed in 1989, taking their suspicions and heartbreak to the grave. To this day, the fate of the Sodder children remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in history. Were they kidnapped? Did they perish in the fire? Or was there something far more insidious at play that night in 1945? The case continues to baffle investigators, and the Sodder family's quest for answers lingers, haunting the small town of Fayetteville like a shadow that refuses to fade. And there you have it, the first 5 unsolved mysteries that continue to puzzle the FBI to this day. But our journey doesn't end here. There are more sinister stories to uncover, more questions waiting in the shadows. In Part 2, we'll reveal 5 more of the FBI's most spine-chilling cases, so stay tuned, because the mysteries only get deeper. We'll be releasing it soon, so make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell to catch it the moment it drops. Until then, keep your eyes open, because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.